Hey, all the kids have gone to bed, and I just hit the button. We are live. This is the Brushfire Mind. I'm your host, Christopher Lowry. With me, I've got Cameron Anderson and Patrick Brown. Unfortunately, our poor Steve is still worshiping at the altar of the United Theocracy of Capitalism and chasing down that almighty dollar, which, kudos, but we miss you, brother. So welcome to the Brushfire Mind. Boy, do we have some conversations to get into tonight. So it's been a week now since the attack on Paris, attacks on Paris, and wow. Okay, let me attack Obama first, because fuck. How do you keep
Making
getting
excuses?
this wrong? How do you keep fucking this up? I mean, see, oh, yeah, nothing to see here. Nothing to see here.
You did see how the House of Representatives voted earlier today, didn't you?
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, veto-proof majority.
Yeah. The U.S. House
Oh, okay.
passed that bill that severely restricted the flow of, I think, or maybe totally stopped it for the moment at all, Syrian.
I thought that passed yesterday.
Well, it might have been yesterday, but the key thing here is that 24 Democrats broke rank and voted for that bill, which gave
44.
a proof majority. Was it 44? I don't know.
But it was
I was
40.
reading so it was like 24. Okay. Well, in any
It got
way, it was
four in
just
it.
yeah.
So a shitload of them.
A shitload of them said, "Well, you know what, Mr. President? Sorry, pal, but we gotta step away here for just a second and really tell you what a freaking moron you are."
Yeah, we have elections every 2 years, and the people
Yeah.
are pissed. They look like they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Holy shit.
We could still get fired, yo.
Yeah. The thing that really has blown my mind, and if you give me the floor just for a moment, I'm actually even going to tie it back into something that you said last week when you were talking about the fall of the prime religion. What at first, France did what I would say the smart thing to do is they started closing borders and started finding people that needed to have a boot in the ass and putting the boot in the ass. And then a few days later, they said, but we'll still take 30,000 refugees. And that really kind of blew my mind. It makes you wonder. I mean, is there really any question? Okay, there's no hard evidence, as it were, but is there any question that how the jihadists are using the migrant crisis to move around the globe? They're infiltrating these groups of people to go to places they would not normally be able to go. I mean, how do you vet somebody from Syria? Is there a Syrian Hall of Records we can just ring up and Ahmed will hop right on it for us and answer all our questions? And I'm sure even if there is such a thing, they'll all tell us the truth, right? How do we vet these people? How do we really, really, really vet these people? Well, and if we vet them properly,
there's such a thing as the Syrian Hall of Records. In almost exactly the same way, there is such a thing as the Library at Alexandria. That's kind of the situation you have there.
I got you. Okay. Still, though, it's not something we can really check things against so easily.
No, I'm absolutely supporting your argument.
And even when we do vet people, like one thing that surprised me after the fact with Nadal Hassan was we were on to him. And he's a freaking major in the U.S. Army with, I would imagine, at least some degree of top secret clearance because he has to see the psychological profiles of other soldiers. So I'd imagine there's at least a little vetting that goes along there. And even though we had information to suggest there might be something seriously wrong there, We didn't act on it. So I have concerns. I am nervous about letting these guys move all around the globe and come into this country. And I mean, how many does it take? Okay, so not every single refugee is a terrorist. Okay, no, but not every single airplane that was in the sky on 9/11 was being flown by terrorists either. But we still grounded all of them. And we grounded all of them for a few days so that no more planes crashed into any more buildings. And for some reason, I have seen on social media, and I don't know if you gentlemen have observed it to the same degree that I have, but there is this there's not just a snotty tone associated with somebody like me having doubts about the refugees coming into the country. Specifically, it has something to do with my Christianity. I'm not being Christian enough. I've seen a lot of the snark, a lot of the condescension from the leftist people that I see on whatever blogosphere I might be reading or whatever. Is that I'm not being Christian enough. That somehow, if I was really, really, really a Christian, I would want these refugees to come in. And the real irony is, of course, this is a lot of leftist people. They're all atheists anyway. It's not like they're actually Christian themselves. So that's just kind of what I've seen and what my thoughts on it are. It's to watch France go from doing what I thought was smart and straight back to what I would say is stupid, and then loops all the way back around to us, where, hey, the governors almost immediately started saying, no, don't bring them to our state. No, thank you. And the vitriol was immediate. So is that what you guys are seeing?
Xenophobe, yeah, all of a sudden we're seeing the word xenophobe slung around. And that's just more of the standard left bullshit. The leftists have a word for everything. And basically, if you are not an absolute diehard fucking pro everything, pro every lifestyle choice, anti-government or anti-American way of life,
anti-capitalist.
If you are not just dead hard left, then something that comes out of your mouth is going to be tagged xenophobe, homophobe, heteronormative view, cisgender normative view, white privilege, and these words are these are the labels that the left uses to say your opinion doesn't matter. You don't have value.
Yeah, it's somehow invalid because of the position you speak your opinion from. The first time I ever came across a really politically correct word was the word ethnocentrism, and it was in 7th grade, and it was in Program Challenge, which was where all the nerdy and artistic kids went. And so, of course, they're gonna cull the smart ones, and they're gonna start brainwashing them extra hard, extra early.
Oh yeah.
So the teacher, and her name's Miss Davis. She writes the word ethnocentrism on the boards. Anybody know what this means? Of course, none of us knew what it meant because it's basically a fucking made-up, smarmy academic word. But instead of defining the word, she said it's much easier to explain what ethnocentrism is by example. She said, have any of you ever been to Mexico? And a few of the kids raised their hand, and she called on this guy named Preston. And she said, Preston, how would you describe a lot of Mexico, the streets and so forth? And he said, well, it's dirty. And she said, you're being ethnocentric. You're practicing ethnocentrism. You're judging Mexico by American standards. Now, I mean, I'm in 7th grade, and even then, at the time, like, my bullshit detector's, like, flying off the radar.
Oh, yeah.
I raise my hand, and I'm like, look, Miss Davis, I mean, I appreciate we're judging Mexico by our standards, but if there's trash on the ground, that's dirty, right? The word dirty still means dirty, no matter if we're using the Mexican version of the word or the American version of the word. But the thing that always surprised me is when she said, Preston, you're being ethnocentric. She said it in that tone of voice. It was clearly not an insult, but it was a way to berate him or browbeat him.
Right.
And he was kind of horrified that here he is in front of his classmates. He thinks that he can speak to some experience, and he finds out kind of on accident that he's being a jerk. The white privilege thing is a really good example of this. We can't control how privileged we are, and we're so used to being privileged because of our whiteness that we can't even conceptualize of how good we have it. Even if we're not personally racist, we're still part of a collectively racist system, so we still have to answer for that racism, even if you really don't have any hatred toward other races in your heart. So, yes, anything you say that's a logical argument that might actually make sense, well, you're just not being understanding enough. You're being heteronormative. Your white privilege blinds you, and so forth. It makes me nuts. It always goes back to that whole ethnocentrism thing to me. For me, rather.
Yeah, and ethnocentrism is a great one to use as an example. Hey, what did you think of Afghanistan? Well, I thought it was dirty. What are you being an ethnocentrist? You're judging by American standards, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. I'm judging that place based on the standards to which I'm accustomed, because I come from a place where we have indoor plumbing. We don't shit in our streets. Let me see.
Most of our population can read.
We don't shit in our streets. I don't walk. I mean, I'll walk out the back door and piss in the yard sometimes, but I don't go outside and pop a squat in front of God and everybody and then reach out to shake your hand with the one that I just wiped my ass with. That's not ethnocentrism. That's fucking hygiene. I have a healthy fear of infectious disease.
Did you? Did anybody watch any of the Democrat debate?
No, fuck no.
No. No.
I just didn't have the time.
Trisha and I watched a good chunk of it. We did not watch the whole thing. It was, man, it got tough. It really did. There was some, according to Bernie Sanders, y'all, you want to really feel the burn? A good bit of this terrorism is
directly related to
climate
global warming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it's only going to get worse as we heat the planet up more and more, and they can grow fewer and fewer crops and have less and less habitable area. They're going to engage in more and more terrorism, because what else are they going to do?
Yeah, I was in a class earlier this week, and the instructor put this diagram up on the board, started talking about it, and the diagram was in French, but it basically showed this is the strategy of the of these jihadists, and the strategy is to conduct violent acts and to use the name of Islam to conduct violent acts in order to get the populations of the world to marginalize all Muslims in order to improve their recruiting campaigns so that they can radicalize more Muslims so that they can then conduct more numbers of violent attacks so that they can continue that cycle of radicalizing more and more Muslims. And that because this is the strategy that is being used by ISIS, that we should not take violent reprisal actions against them because that's what they want. And my first thought was, did we stop reading 1984 in fucking high school?
No, dude.
I don't think I was even
stop
in
reading.
high school when I read 1984.
We're just not bothered by surveillance anymore. We don't give a shit if our lives are broadcast and watched by others. The three of us are basically putting out a damn YouTube show right now for our own funsies. So, culturally speaking, like, you get points on your iPhone if you check in at the damn mall when you go to the food court and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
and that shouldn't scare anybody.
no, not at all. You can't even remove the battery from your iPhone. That's not spooky at all.
Well, and this just lends credence to what I've been saying for the past about 5 years. Orson Welles was not an author; he was a prophet.
Yeah, him and Ayn Rand both.
Yeah.
From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The 21st century motor company model.
So
yeah, and what was really interesting to me, you had all this stuff coming out over the course of the week, but what was one of the most telling signs to me that the United States is getting shown up in just about every aspect of all this stuff. But they finally came out and officially recognized that it was a bomb that brought down that Russian airplane. And within hours of you getting that piece of news, Vladimir Putin comes out and his ministers come out and say, we're sending a Russian missile cruise carrier to cooperate with the French to attack ISIS. Wait,
See,
what?
Why aren't we getting in that?
because that's what ISIS wants, and that would be really stupid strategy to give ISIS what they want.
Yeah, and then like Cameron was talking about the governors, last count that I heard, it was 30 states. Their governors have said, we don't want these Syrian refugees. It's obviously a bad idea. And Obama gets up in front of the microphone at the White House and says that the American people cannot elect competent leaders.
Yeah, tell me about it.
You saw my meme?
Pot, kettle.
Really? So you win in some of the biggest popular elections of all time, and the American people cannot elect competent leaders. All right, check, Barry. Okay.
Yeah, really. But I think that it was a really interesting turn of events with all the governors from 30 states saying that, and then the United States Congress says, you know what? You have to start listening to these people because, like Chris said, we can get fired. My Uncle Kirk actually put up a little blurb about the Syrian refugees and everything like that, and the end of the diatribe was, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because all of those people in Washington, all they have to do is make you fear it enough to re-elect them, and then the problem is solved in their eyes.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of truth in that.
I do think that there was some political motivation for the vote in Congress.
Oh, sure.
But I don't know, man. It's the thing that I'm really stuck on is some of the stuff that Barack Obama has said. I'm really trying to think if I have ever heard a president use quite that level of mean-spirited snark, where when he made the comment about how Republicans are afraid of widows and orphans and 3-year-olds and
well, wasn't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that guy that shot up those recruiting stations in Chattanooga, wasn't he one of these refugees?
I'm not actually sure.
Remembering correctly?
That I really don't.
But to kind of step back yet again further, Cameron, where you were talking about how the whole thing about you're not being Christian enough to accept these refugees and everything like that. Well, doesn't it also state in the Bible maybe somewhere that when you conquer your enemy, it instructs you to kill every man, woman, and child because that's the only way to defeat your enemy?
Yeah, that's Leviticus, though, and it doesn't really apply to modern Christianity in theory. Christ and the Word in the New Testament was supposed to kind of do away with all the Old Testament stuff. But you're right, and it goes on, and it lists every man, woman, child, chicken, goat, pig, blah blah blah. But that's Old Testament shit.
So why is it? Because, and look, what's spooky is they do want to fight us. They want us to go there and fight them because they get to like start Armageddon or whatever their bizarro version of it is. Whereas we think of Armageddon as a terrible thing, we can just put that shit off for a few more millennia. They're ready to get it on, and for it to happen, we have to go there and attack them. But just the same, I still think we should give them what they want and kick the ever-loving hell out of them.
Well, you mentioning Armageddon, the apocalyptic prophecy stuff is part of this. These are hyper-conservative Muslims that they're attached to the idea that the end times are upon us, and that's kind of why they're stepping up their game. It's time to really spread the word of Allah and convert as many as possible and defeat the infidel because the end times are upon us.
Yeah, and that's really spooky. Those sound like people that need to have their ass whipped. Okay, fine, they're sick and they're twisted, and it really, when you think about it, it doesn't make very much sense at all. But, hey, they're going to do things like shoot up Paris and God knows who else and where else and how many other people. So,
right.
Okay, if that's what they want, let's give them a little taste of what they want. I'd say, I don't know, 140, 150 Hellfire missiles to start would... It's amazing. There are a lot of people that think they're ready to die for a cause, and then the moment actually comes upon them, and then suddenly they have a whole lot of doubts. Now, Chris, you've told me before that culturally, a lot of Muslims are just so different in the sense that, whereas even the Japanese in World War II revered their emperor as a god, they didn't want to die. They wanted to live. They wanted to do things and have prosperous lives and societies and so forth. Whereas with Muslims, they really are kind of death obsessed. And something that I was telling Trisha last night, the biggest difference between Islam and any other religion or faith or spirituality or whatever. If I as a Christian want to make the world a better place, I start by looking at myself. What can I do to be a better person and to interact with my world in a more positive manner? And maybe to make the world a better place, I start by cleaning up my own backyard or maybe volunteer in my own local community. And most other religions and spiritualities are that way. You start inward. Whereas Islam is completely different. It has to dominate. It has to enslave. You're going to change the world out there to make yourself feel better. Whereas as a Christian, if I see a woman in a bikini, in a perfect Christian state, I'm not going to think lustful thoughts about her. I'm going to exercise the self-control to not fantasize about having sex with this woman. The Muslims' response to seeing a woman in a bikini is, we got to cover it up. I can't control those urges. I might just go crazy and rape her. So cover it up.
No. That's not how it works. The problem with what you're saying is this. Under the doctrines of Islam, they won't try to correct the problem. She'll be stoned to death because she's committed a grievous sin.
Look, I understand literally
She
what
doesn't
would
get
happen.
fixed. She doesn't get fixed. She gets murdered.
No, I understand that. Yeah, okay, fine. They kill her, but culturally, the way that it is accepted in practice to solve this problem, generally speaking, the lustful thought is a sin. So how do we deal with it? Well, instead of trying to control yourself and not have the lustful thought, they just try and remove the object of lust. It's a completely different way of looking at the world. My dad told me that in the late 70s he heard some mullah say something and it's always stuck with him. He said that their side would win. The mullah said that their side would win. It might take a long time, and they might be poor, and this and that, but in the end, they would outlast us, and they would win. And the reason is because we value life, and life is temporary, and we will sacrifice many things in the name of life. And they value death, and death is permanent, and death is forever, and their sacrifices are death, and their sacrifices do further the cause of death. So, whereas you and I, hey man, you don't strap bombs to kids. Our criminals don't strap bombs to kids. But there's just a certain sect of them that do that sort of thing. It's what
In
happens.
fact, that's a very interesting and telling statement right there. Our criminals do not strap bombs to children. Their heroes do.
Yes, their heroes do.
Right.
So I'm a racist or I'm a terrible Christian because I think culturally there's something in Islam. Maybe it's just that part of the world, or maybe it's something inherent to Islam itself, or maybe it's both. I don't know. I don't even really care up to a certain point. But what I do know is that it's suicidal to pretend like it doesn't exist, that this is not a real problem and a real threat, that your quote unquote um, average person from that part of the world really fundamentally might not see the world the way that you do at all.
Well, and they're not going to. And it kind of boils down to this, talking about our culture, which embraces life, and their culture, which embraces death. You have to think about it in, I guess, sort of this sense. Our country's been around for 239 years, and we've been about living a free life. And you have people who do live very long lives here, 80, 70, 90 years. And you're free to do as you like around here. Over there, they've been blowing themselves to crap for the last 2,500 years. It's all their culture is. It's all they know, which is why they embrace death. So death isn't a big deal to them. It could come at any time.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Whereas
the Muslims, the Muslim world has been on a rampage of conquest ever since Xerxes' Persians and their Zoroastrianism was replaced by Sunni Islam, and then I mean that began the whole crusade of Islam across Africa, across the Middle East, across Europe, that eventually got responded to by the Crusades. And I always hate it when the fucking libs, oh yeah, well, Christians are just as bad as Muslims are because they had the Crusades. The Crusades happened because they were being attacked by fucking Muslims. That's how that started. It was a defense mechanism. Did it go too far? Sure. I'll grant that maybe it went a little too far. Or, oh, wait a minute. We're still having that problem now. Maybe you didn't go far enough.
So, and then that brings up the point, that begs the question, how far do you have to go to defeat such an enemy?
There was a... Yeah.
Think carefully.
I can answer that question.
No.
You know, it can be boiled down to this meme that I saw just today on the internet. It was a photo of an atomic explosion, and it said, "We've been at peace with Japan since 1945. Perhaps it's time to make peace with Islam."
Yeah, I've seen that one a few times. That presents a whole fucking bucket of problems. You know how people say, "Yeah, I don't want to open that can of worms." That is a can of fucking bees.
Oh, sure.
Oh.
It's easy to say you want to open that can, but do you really have the Constitution to hold up with what comes with opening that can?
Now, have y'all seen the thing with the? There's a panel talking about violent. They're speaking about terrorism and violence in the world, and this girl stands up in the back of the room, and she's got a hijab on, and she says she starts going on about how most Muslims are peaceful and blah yada yada.
What is this thing with Brigitte Nielsen?
Yeah, and she lists all of the irrelevant silent majorities. Yeah, that one. Here's the thing: the strategy that would be best embraced and most effective here is quite simply anything we can do to cause the silent majority to break that silence, to stand up and respond and say, "Not in my name," not no. If this is not what your religion's about, then why have you been sitting on your fucking thumb for the last 10 years? No, I'm sorry, 15 years while this shit's been going on. Why haven't you been jumping up and doing something about it? If they keep telling us that it's only 10%, I've heard as much as 20%, but the usual figure is 10%, and well, only 7% of Nazis were, or only 7% of Germans were Nazis. Yeah, and that was not 7% of 1.8 billion Muslims. 10% of 1.8 billion people is half the population of the United States, radicalized, militarized, and running around with a great big hard-on for murder and jihad and Allah. That's fucking scary numbers. The only way to deal with a force like that is with mass casualty response. Like zombies. You don't fight zombies with a fucking 9mm that's got, 11 in the clip if you're doing good. No! Fuck no! You throw propane tanks.
Propane tanks actually don't explode. The Mythbusters went out of their way to bust that myth, and I forget what they eventually had to shoot a propane tank with to get it to explode, but it's just not how it works. They scaled all the way up. They started with the Walter PPK, and by the time they were at like the 1911, so here we go, and it was barely even making a dent in this thing. It's shocking how well they're designed.
They are quite well done. No, what it takes is a road flare. You have to tie a road flare to it. Seriously, you tie a road flare to it, you throw it, and then you put a hole in it.
All right, then. But, okay, so people say that you can't judge Christians by the Westboro Baptist people, for example. And to that I say, A, there's not the silent majorities. Most Christians are pretty clear that Westboro doesn't represent them. It's not even close. I mean, God praises dead soldiers and all of that mess. No. That's
right. And there are anti-protesters showing up and doing demonstrations against Westboro Baptist wherever they do their demonstrations. Right. You don't see that. There are no anti-jihad Muslims showing up in mass numbers to protest jihadists. It's just not happening.
And I'd also like to point out that You don't have 10% of Christians, radical Christians, turning into these psychotic, violent soldiers that are willing to throw their lives away in conquest. So it goes back to what I was saying is that culturally, there is something in Islam that is fundamentally different. So
Right.
this whole thing where they're trying to say that we're trying to uh, get turned against all Muslims so that we will attack and we will invade and we'll make their recruiting process more effective and so forth. They don't need us for that. They really don't. Conditions are such for them that they already believe, excuse me, not that they already believe, but conditions are, you know what, y'all, I've had a lot of beer. The thing that I'm trying to say is that the conditions, there is something in Islam where 10% of them could be radicalized and turned into murderers. And there is not something in Judaism or Christianity or Celtic Druidism or atheism. You know, I was thinking about this. Even even regimes that we think of that are just
in fairness,
evil.
I am 10% of Druids.
I'm on the brute squad. You are the
Right.
brute squad. But even a place that we would think of as an evil, oppressive regime like North Korea, they don't tie bombs to their kids.
No.
No,
So-
in fact, they're so genteel, they won't even cannibalize their own children. They'll trade with the neighbor.
Yeah. Well, and going back to the whole thing about it being something that's easily radicalized, when was the last time you heard a story about a Christian fundamentalist going off the rails?
Okay,
A lot
let
of
me
people
tag
answer
that real
with
quick.
Timothy McVeigh.
Oh, yeah, let me tag that real quick. There's been a lot of shit on the internet lately, and it's not just on the internet. Whoopi Goldberg jumped up and down about Timothy McVeigh being a Christian,
And
and
Hitler being a Christian.
Hitler being
Since
a Christian
when?
and all that. I saw one earlier. It was here's a list of 5 or 6 Christians that were worse than Islamic terrorists in America, and the list was Hitler. Okay. Hitler was as bad as Islam, but as the terrorists. Let's see. Yeah, to date, Hitler's got a higher body count. I'll give you that one. But wait, Hitler hated Christians. Hitler hated Jews, Christians, blacks, gays. Hitler was not a Christian. He was an agnostic. Timothy McVeigh, he was a political dissident. His faith had absolutely nothing to do with it. He was an anti-government commentator with his fucking bomb. Then they listed the KKK. What?
Are you kidding me?
That's a white supremacist organization. And by the way, massively anti-Catholic. Massively anti-Catholic supremacist organization.
Yeah, I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, it was just like in Mississippi Burning where they were talking about the Klan. WASP, okay? White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. I mean, the KKK. I can't believe that one.
And there were a couple more on the list that they weren't even Christians. And in the few cases that the person, one of them that was listed was how do they phrase it? The ongoing campaign of terror by Christians against abortion clinics. Really?
Yeah, because I think murdering people.
Have those guys killed as many people as, I don't know, the Paris raid? And if so, have they killed as many as 9/11?
Yeah.
I mean, to say that group is worse than the one group is worse than another, uh, either you are either you must argue that one group is a greater threat, or that one group has already caused more damage. There's no other metric by which to judge the worstness of them.
Because
Who's
they
the
could all be
worst?
considered bad, just in different directions.
But then I keep coming back to this. At the end of the day, the argument that you're making when you say that is that it's not wrong if somebody else is also wrong. It comes back to two wrongs make a right. You know, you shouldn't shoot that guy. Well, he shot him. I mean, that's liberal logic. If the Muslims want to murder people, it's okay because there have been some examples of Christians murdering people, and here's a list of Christians that murdered people, like Hitler, Timothy McVeigh.
Well, and I think that liberals look the other way with it, not just because they're stupid, but because, as I pointed out earlier, they've been doing it to themselves for the last 2,000 plus years. So, oh well, it's just their way of life.
Well,
Okay, fine, it's their way of life, but does that make it any more justifiable than us trying to stop it?
well, they have a lot in common too. I mean, we were talking earlier about how the Western mentality worships life, and the faith of Islam worships death. We revere life, and they revere death.
Right.
Its permanency. Ayn Rand said basically held that the American left worshipped death. That they were just all about anything that could degrade. So I mean, they have a lot of common ground to work with there.
And she couldn't have spoken truer words.
Well, anytime you start arguing from the philosophy of egalitarianism, your argument is as simple as some people have it better than others, and since these people aren't smart enough to take things when you give them to them and use them to rise up, then the only way to make everybody equal is to tear these people down.
Right.
I've got a cat down here, apparently.
And then it goes back to that whole thing, like Milton Friedman said, when he was talking about the free enterprise system was the only economic system that had proven through history to work the most effective. Everything else, where people in society are worse off, or they're driven into extreme poverty, and there's like the huge inequality thing. It's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. And you go back to the whole Marxism thing and everything with Ayn Rand, and it really does provide the commentary you're looking for.
And the further
people don't want to look.
The further you depart from that laissez-faire capitalism free trade arrangement, the further that they like to talk about the income inequality.
Yeah.
And there is an income inequality. That's a true statement. Some people make more money than other people.
But it's a necessary thing.
Well, not only that,
Income inequality.
the further you depart from a true capitalism, the broader that gap gets. The more socialism you add, the more government dependency you add, the deeper that gap's going to get.
Well, there's a whole host of economic factors that go into that.
Yeah.
But first of all, the phrase wealth gap, I hate it.
I do too.
It's an
I hate wealth gap, but income inequality
type of word for me. Like it really is. Like why? Okay, so there's a wealth gap. First of all, hasn't there always been a wealth gap? I mean, like since the first ever tribal society, the tribal leader had more than everybody else in the tribe. Period. That's how
Right.
that worked.
And in that case, he had the tribe. And that's what these fuckers don't get. The further you depart from absolute individual liberty, personal responsibility, and freedom, the more you develop a caste system. The less liberty you have, the more layers of caste system develop. And so, as you grow the government bigger and bigger and bigger, the government becomes more and more and more tiered. And as you get more and more and more tiered, the higher up those tiers you go, the less space there is for people in those levels. So what you end up with is an emperor who has some kings, and they have lords, and they have dukes, and they have knights, and they have peasants, and the peasants have serfs, and the serfs have untouchables. The more you develop a government, the larger it gets, the further and further that gap is going to spread. However, the closer you get to a total anarchy, and I'm not advocating for a total anarchy, but the closer you...
being able to call the police.
Yeah.
Right, the further... I'm sorry, say again?
I was just making a smart-ass comment. I said, no, I like being able to actually call the police.
Yeah... But anyway, the further you get away from a totalitarian dictatorship, the fewer caste positions there are to hold you in. The fewer bosses you have. And that's part of the problem with a bureaucratic government, is there are so many people above any one person that's involved in the government that are just... they're literally just sucking money straight up the pipe.
There's a whole other aspect to this whole wealth gap thing that never gets discussed, and it sort of pisses me off, and it is the value of the dollar itself. One reason, and this is just my own armchair analysis, but one reason why I think the wealth gap in terms of pure numbers is the way that it is, where you have people that have billions versus people that make minimum wage, which is about $8 an hour. But the thing is even just 30 years ago, to be stupendously rich, I mean, like, lifestyles of the rich and famous, I'm Robin Leach, and I'm going to scream about your house in a British accent, you didn't have to have billions of dollars. You could do it with millions. And that was because your dollars bought more. But that also worked at the other end of the economic spectrum. Minimum wage was $3 an hour, $4 an hour, but milk is 50 cents for a gallon or 99 cents for a gallon. Tricia and I were talking about this the other day. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but eggs went and got freaking expensive, man. You don't go buy a carton of eggs for 99 cents anymore. That's
You're
not
lucky
how
to get
that
away for
works
less
at
than
all.
$2.
Right.
So your wealth gap is not just how much money a person makes versus how much money another person makes. If I could make $50,000 a year and enjoy the lifestyle of somebody that makes $100,000 a year, if I make intelligent decisions with my $50,000, because my $50,000 has a lot of buying power, well, there might be a $50,000 gap between me and that next guy, but because of what my dollars can do for me, it doesn't mean as much. It's not even necessarily a negative thing that there is a difference in mine and his salary. But now, all of a sudden, like, I bought a gallon of milk today, and the cheap gallon of milk was $2.79. Don't even talk to me about peanut butter. That's one that pisses me off because all my kids like it, and that has definitely gotten more expensive. So anyhow, the whole wealth gap thing, I don't even know how we got spun off onto it, but one of you guys said wealth gap, and I got mad because I hate that term. I hate it because you're never going to get rid of it. It's always going to exist. Even in the communist governments, even in the socialist governments, there's always the top 1%.
Well,
just
no, especially in the communist governments and the socialist governments. It exists there more than anywhere else. the
And
more you,
yeah.
further you approach that totalitarian state, the more that wealth gap increases. Now, once you get to a totalitarian dictatorship, once you get to North Korea, it's not the top 1%. It's the top. It's the top Kim. It's freaking Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Un, or Kim. That little fucking the new little gargoyle. I forget his name, but the income disparity is Kim has all the money, and everybody else is eating their children. That's that's the place that Barack Obama wants to go to. That's the place that Dan Feinstein wants to go to, is that total government dependency. And once you get there, one person has all the money and everybody else is in absolute abject poverty.
Or slavery, if you will.
Gentlemen, this is fun, but I am going to have to depart. I can't believe we've blown through an hour, but it's after 10. I know this because I had to go pause the DVR recording on Z Nation.
Ew. Damn,
Well,
I'm going to have
buddy,
to
it
wait
was
till
good
11
talking
to watch
to
Z Nation then.
Say what?
Said I'm going to have to wait till like 11 to watch Z Nation then. But I think we got some good sound bites out of this one. So let's go ahead and we'll call it a night then. So
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in. Those of you who did, obviously nobody did, but that's okay. The three of us had a good conversation, and hopefully I'll get a couple of decent sound bites out of this, and we can put them out there and start to build that audience, build that following. This has been the Brushfire Mind. Thanks for your time. Witness! And remember, if you build a man a fire, you'll keep him warm for the evening. But if you set a man on fire, you'll keep him warm for the rest of his life. Good night.